As someone that claims Resident Evil is my favorite video game franchise of all time, I gotta admit, there are some things that its biggest horror game competitor, Silent Hill, does better than Resident Evil. I mean, don't get me wrong, I will still defend Resident Evil as the best horror franchise of all time until I turn blue, but I've also become a huge fan of Silent Hill over time, and despite my love for Resident Evil, there are just some things that Silent Hill excels at more than Resident Evil. So, on today's episode of Nerdspace Games, in honor of Silent Hill F releasing later this month, your boy's taking a look at the biggest things that I personally believe that Silent Hill as a franchise does better than Resident Evil. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, this video is officially sponsored by G Fuel, so if you're looking for ways to support the channel, consider picking up your favorite tub of G Fuel using the link below or the code NerdspaceGames at checkout to save up to 20% off your next order. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games, and here's everything that Silent Hill does better than Resident Evil. Let's get it. Number 1, the story and the lore. When taking a look at different stories explored in Silent Hill, it's kind of a no-brainer that the stories in that franchise are more emotional driven and more impactful. After all, Silent Hill is a psychological horror game, whereas Resident Evil is mostly just survival horror or action horror, depending on which game you look at. For that reason, the stories of Silent Hill tend to focus on trauma and the emotional baggage that the characters, especially the protagonist, carries with them throughout the game. That's actually a topic that we'll talk about more later in the next entry, but the stories of Silent Hill just carry more emotional weight and are usually filled with twists and turns that keep us on our toes along the way. Not to mention, the lore of Silent Hill is extremely heavy in comparison to Resident Evil. Of course, the franchise dives into different themes in each game, from a father searching for his missing daughter to a husband mourning the loss of his deceased wife. But overall, the themes of Silent Hill are ones that connect with us on an emotional level. The stories are usually filled with mysteries that keep us guessing from start to finish, and unlike Resident Evil, Silent Hill tends to focus heavily on the story versus the gameplay. Whether it's learning why the characters are brought to Silent Hill or battling a religious cult looking to bring their god into our world. The stories that Silent Hill tells are some of the most interesting stories in all of video games, not just horror games. Number 2, more complex characters. As teased in the last entry, one of the most important parts of Silent Hill games and the stories that they tell are the characters, especially the protagonists. Whereas Resident Evil characters are usually your typical horror game protagonists, Silent Hill instead focuses on more flawed characters that tend to have a tragic past or they are carrying some sort of baggage. Because of this trauma that they face, most protagonists are brought to Silent Hill for a reason in one way or another to face their past and confront whatever it is that's keeping them from moving on with their life. It's really hard to address this topic in depth, as it would require me to touch on some spoilers, which I don't really want to do, even if a lot of these games are 10 years old. What I will say though is that the characters have more emotional scenes and interactions with each other in comparison to Resident Evil. We see the characters of Silent Hill break down as they face their worst nightmares, and we easily get some of the most heartbreaking scenes ever, some of which are just pure cinema and award worthy. Because the franchise focuses on psychological horror, in some cases the nightmares and personal trauma that the characters face manifest in some of the most disturbing ways, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Number 3, the puzzles. This one is a little closer as both franchises are iconic for featuring some of the most challenging puzzles in all of horror games. In the case of Resident Evil, the puzzles tend to focus more on physical puzzles, like moving objects around to fit into place in a certain way, whereas Silent Hill thrives on logic puzzles and riddles. Don't get me wrong, Resident Evil features these types of puzzles as well, especially Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, but nowhere near the extent that Silent Hill does, especially the original trilogy and even the remake of Silent Hill 2. Now personally, I've always felt that the logic puzzles and riddles of the Silent Hill franchise were both more challenging and more satisfying than the ones in Resident Evil. Sure, some of them are just outright ridiculous, looking at you bookstore puzzle, but most of them just require you to think outside of the box and use reasoning and logic to solve. Rather, it's the Zodiac puzzle, which ironically has nothing to do with the Zodiacs to solve, the music room riddle, or the coin puzzle that challenges you to understand the deeper meaning behind the words in the riddle before you. Silent Hill has no shortage of puzzles, and most of them are up there in the rankings of best puzzles featured in video games, period. Yeah, they're that good. Number 4, more disturbing monster designs. Whereas most of the monster designs in Resident Evil are arguably more iconic and in some cases even better, Silent Hill definitely takes the title for most disturbing monster designs. Sure, the giant fetus for Village is up there as one of the most disturbing creatures in all of horror games, but the Silent Hill franchise is full of monsters that are at least on par with that creature, let alone even more disturbing. One major reason why Silent Hill kills it in terms of disturbing monster designs is because of the fact that most creatures in the Silent Hill universe are manifested by the fears and nightmares of the characters. For example, my minor spoiler here for Silent Hill 2, by the way, but the abstract baddie in Silent Hill 2 is based on Angela's past, in which she was sexually abused by her father and brother, hence the really disturbing design of the monster that resembles two figures on a bed. Other disturbing designs include a pregnant woman with spider-like mechanical arms coming out of her, little ghoul-like children carrying scissors in the elementary school, and much, much more. Like I said, Resident Evil might have more iconic and memorable monster designs, but Silent Hill definitely has Resident Evil beat in the disturbing department, that's for sure. Number 5, the setting. This one was actually really hard to put down here, as both franchises are iconic for their settings. I mean, the Spencer Mansion, the RPD station, and Raccoon City are easily some of the best locations in all of horror games, so it's really hard to give the W to Silent Hill here. Despite saying that though, Silent Hill is just a better setting for a horror game no matter how many times I think about it. I mean, picture this, fog-filled ghost town with monsters roaming around the streets and buildings everywhere you go. That alone already sets the tone for a pretty horrifying experience. Then when you add in the fact that Silent Hill actually changes over time, turning the fog world into a nightmare reality, then yeah, Silent Hill as a setting just works better for a horror game. Something about the feeling of running down the streets of this ghost town unable to see a few feet ahead of you, yet you can hear every single monster in the distance and the sound of your radio going berserk as you get closer to them. Yeah, it's just a horrifying experience altogether. The most interesting aspect of Silent Hill though is how well it connects to the story of the game. See, Silent Hill is not just a tourist town that we all know and love, but it's a manifestation created to suit the people coming into this town. Whether it's Alessa's nightmares or guilt that different protagonists have when they arrive here, Silent Hill bends and shapes itself into different forms for different people. This is how each Silent Hill game feels different from each other, despite us revisiting this location multiple times in multiple games. It's the ideal location for a psychological horror game, and for that reason, I feel like it's just a better setting than the Spencer Mansion, RPD station, and any other setting that Resident Evil has to offer. Hell, even if you go into the individual buildings of Silent Hill, and even some of those locations are almost as iconic as the Spencer Mansion, like Brookhaven Hospital and Midwich Elementary. Number 6, the atmosphere. While on the topic of the setting of Silent Hill, I think it's important to address the fact that the overall atmosphere of Silent Hill is much more immersive and terrifying than Resident Evil. As mentioned earlier, the town of Silent Hill as a setting just makes sense for a psychological horror game since it's kind of shaped by the protagonist or other characters involved in the game. The fog-filled ghost town aesthetic creates a tense atmosphere that makes you feel alone in the world. But even as you enter the buildings, you are treated to other designs that are just as terrifying. The atmosphere in these buildings are insane, whether it's the fog world or the nightmare reality. I think the sound design and music of Silent Hill is what really creates an immersive atmosphere that is unmatched by any other horror game. Hearing the sounds of chains and banging while you make your way through the rustic nightmare reality set pieces, or hearing the disturbing sounds that bubblehead nurses make as you get closer to them creates a really disturbing atmosphere. The incredible thing about the atmosphere of Silent Hill is that you never stop feeling anxiety and dread no matter where you go in this town. There's always a looming feeling of tension and fear, and the sound designs and set pieces are what really creates this atmosphere for us, the player, throughout the entire experience. I love the atmospheres of classic Resident Evil games, but even I can admit that the atmosphere in most of the Silent Hill games are unmatched in the feeling of dread that these environments and sound design creates for us, the player. Number 7, scarier. I saved this one for last as 1, I think horror is pretty subjective, and 2, I feel like I'll be revisiting a few other traits that I talked about earlier on today's list as I explain why I think Silent Hill is scarier than Resident Evil. For the record, I don't think that every Silent Hill game is scarier than every Resident Evil game, obviously. For example, RE7 could make a case for being scarier than a lot of the Silent Hill games alone. What I'm looking at is the overall vibe of Silent Hill versus the overall vibe of Resident Evil, and when I take a look at the whole picture, I just find myself scared more often when playing and even replaying a Silent Hill game than I do with a Resident Evil game. Resident Evil tends to focus on tension, whether that is the feeling of being overwhelmed, a stalker enemy constantly following you, a lack of resources, or traditional jump scares. I think the easiest way to describe Resident Evil's horror is that it focuses primarily on tension. In the case of Silent Hill as a psychological horror game, it dives deeper into what scares us more than Resident Evil does. For one, it tackles real-life themes that honestly scares us a lot in our everyday lives. Themes like anxiety, depression, loss, obsession, pride, and much, much more. Even with these fears aside though, Silent Hill also focuses on another more impactful way of scaring the players, atmospheric horror. In the last two entries, I mentioned how the setting of the town of Silent Hill and the atmosphere of the Silent Hill games are just more immersive than what we see in Resident Evil. Well, these two elements combine to create some of the most tense and terrifying settings that leave us constantly terrified. I mentioned earlier how the atmosphere of Silent Hill creates a constant feeling of terror throughout the entire game. No matter where you go, there's always this feeling of dread and fear that follows you because of the sound design, monsters, and set pieces that just keeps us constantly shaking from start to finish. This feeling of anxiety created by the pure terror of Silent Hill's atmospheric core is arguably more terrifying than the tension and jump scares that Resident Evil focuses on. Did you ever see that famous graphic of a fork in the road, one of which leads to Raccoon City and one of which leads to Silent Hill? Well, give me Raccoon City all day because I'll take the slow-moving, predictable zombies and monsters any day over a reality created from someone's worst nightmares in a town that I can only leave when it allows me to leave. But that does it for this episode of Nerdspace Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what your thoughts are on today's video. Again, I want to elaborate. Resident Evil is still my favorite horror franchise of all time, and it does a lot of things better than Silent Hill in my opinion. Still, it's hard to ignore the fact that there are some things that Silent Hill does better than Resident Evil, hence the video. But let me know what you think. Do you agree with my list? Is there something you don't agree with that you think Resident Evil does better? Or is there something else that I didn't cover in today's video that you think Silent Hill does better than Resident Evil? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more survival horror content. Also leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerdspace Games. Take care.